Hello, I am Lou, as you probably know already, or maybe you don't because maybe you've never actually seen me. If you're seeing this video kind of by mistake, I'm a realtor in the Chicago suburbs who specializes in helping people buy and sell mid-century modern and other modern architectural properties. And the reason I'm making this video today is I thought it would be better for me to explain certain things about how to buy a house currently with the market being as hot as it is. So I've got a list of points that I want to go over, and please let me know in the comments or by email later if you have any questions. So the first thing that you need to know is that in a market like we're seeing right now, where it truly is a seller's market, there are many more buyers out there looking for homes than there are homes for sale. And that's even more so when we're talking specifically about modern architectural properties. There just aren't that many of them compared to traditional homes anyway. So in a market like this, where there's fewer homes on the market versus a normal market for our area, it's even tougher to buy one of these homes. So the first thing is that you have to be ready to move quickly. So what are the important things to remember about that? Well, the first thing, of course, is for me to turn off my phone, which I'm going to do now. So the first thing, of course, is that you have to have your pre-qualification letter or proof of funds documents ready to go. The reason for that is that we have to submit those with any offer, so you're going to need them anyway. And especially with a proof of funds, if you're a cash buyer, there's no reason for you not to have that handy, because all you need to do is go into your bank accounts online and print out a statement. You can redact your account numbers, obviously, or if you can't do that, I'm happy to help you with that. But we want to have something ready to show a listing agent for a property you're interested in that you have the funds available to purchase the home. If you're getting a mortgage, you need to have a pre-qualification letter from your lender. It's not going to affect your credit rating unless you're asking, 27 different lenders for a pre-qualification, which you're probably not going to do. But you need to have that ready, because we have to make sure, first of all, as realtors, that our clients are pre-qualified to purchase homes in the price range that we're looking in. And so I need to have that handy in your file anyway. But more than that, you need to have it ready, because when you find a house that you love and you want to submit an offer on, there probably are going to be other offers on the property, and you want to have everything ready to go. Okay, the next thing, and this seems really obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's not always the case, you have got to be reachable. So let me know the best way to get a hold of you, whether it's phone, text, or email. But I have to be able to get a hold of you, because we are going to have to move quickly when you find a home that you like. Again, because there probably will be other offers. Now, if you're the type of person who's really chill and really laid back, you maybe only check your email once a week, you kind of turn off your text message notifications, you don't usually like to answer the phone because you just like to relax, and there's really nothing that important in life that you really need to be bothered by all these sounds and things flashing at you all the time. I applaud you, and that's great, but guess what? You're not buying a house in this market. I mean, seriously, you have to be reachable, and you have to be reachable quickly. I need to be able to get a hold of you because when we start negotiating for the transaction, it's going to go very quickly, and I need to be able to get in touch with you. So make sure I know the best way to get a hold of you. Now, part of that is you need to be able to actually go to see homes pretty quickly. We don't know when anything's going to come to market unless it's one of my listings, in which case I will let you know that. But for the most part, a listing comes to market and I'll see it, you'll see it, we'll talk about it, and you'll need to be able to go see it pretty quickly. Now, we are not still at the point like some other markets in the US where you have a matter of hours before a house goes under contract. Sometimes that is the case, but typically within a few days, a nice property that is obviously going to be in demand is going to go under contract. So you got to be able to move quickly. Now, if you're out of state or out of the area, or you work 9 to 5 and can't get to see a house right away, I'm happy to go see a house on your behalf and to either record a video for you to show you around the house, or to do a FaceTime call so that you can direct me to things that you specifically want to see or that maybe you're concerned about. I've done that plenty of times, and I'm happy to do it for you. But you have to be able to either go see a house, or you have to be okay doing a virtual showing like that, where it's a video tour or a FaceTime tour or something like that, because other people are going to be going to see the house quickly. And one last thing that I need to point out is that we do everything electronically now in terms of signing paperwork for the contracts and the disclosures and all the other things that you're going to need to sign. So it's important, if there are two of you that will be on the contract, that you each have your own email address. Most people, this is the case, but I have had a couple of instances in the past where spouses shared an email address within their household. That's not going to work. So even if you have to set up an address that you're just going to use temporarily, go ahead and get that set up now, because you're each going to need to have a separate address when we start signing documents online. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is the pecking order. Now, what do I mean by that? In a multiple offer situation, there is absolutely a pecking order of which offers are going to be taken the most seriously by the seller. And that pecking order is probably not going to be a surprise. And depending on where you are in this pecking order, you may be really happy or you may be really disappointed. But this is just the way it is. So at the top of the pecking order are cash buyers with no home to sell. If you are a cash buyer and you do not have to sell an existing home in order to buy the one you want to buy, you are going to be taken the most seriously, and you're probably going to be at the top of the list. Now, there may be other cash buyers who don't have a home to sell, and so then it's going to come down to the specific terms of your offer, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But you're always going to be at the top of the pecking order, because the reason is that it reduces risk for the seller. So because you're a cash buyer, they don't have to worry about a mortgage contingency. If something comes up that would prevent somebody getting a mortgage from getting that mortgage, that's not something they have to worry about. And the big thing is that it usually means that they're not going to have to worry about an appraisal, because when you purchase a house with a mortgage, the lender is going to order an appraisal. And there can be issues, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, that can come up with the appraisal. So when you're buying cash, you don't have to worry about that, because there is no appraisal, because there's no lender involved. Okay, so next on the pecking order, if you are getting a mortgage, but you do not have a home to sell. Now, you're not going to be as favorable as somebody who's a cash buyer, because you do have that mortgage contingency and the appraisal contingency. So that's, those are things that a seller really would rather not deal with. But if you're getting a mortgage, it is what it is. But the fact that you don't have a home to sell is good, because they don't have to worry about that whole thing. When a buyer has a home to sell, or even a home to close on, if they're selling a house and it's already under contract, there's still a chance that that transaction could fall apart and cause a domino effect and problems for the seller on the house that you want to buy. So that's why you'll still be next in line after a cash buyer, and you'll be more favorable to the seller than somebody who does have a house to sell. Okay, so next in line in the pecking order is a cash buyer who does have a home to sell. So maybe you have the funds available to pay cash and you don't need to get a mortgage, which is great for you. But if you have a home to sell, then again, that's still some risk for the seller of the house that you want to buy, because they don't know when your house is going to go on a contract, how long your closing time frame is going to be, what your buyer's situation is in terms of, are they a cash buyer? Do they have a home to sell? So again, a lot more risk for things getting delayed or falling apart if you have a home to sell. And unfortunately, if you are getting a mortgage and you have a home to sell to buy the house that you want to buy, you're going to be at the bottom of the pecking order. So just remember that going into this. If you're in a multiple offer situation, there's a good chance that somebody's going to come in with a cash offer, or maybe not a home to sell, and they're going to beat you out almost automatically unless you're offering way more money. However, that creates a problem potentially with the appraisal, which I will address again in a minute. Okay, so the next thing we need to talk about is, how are you going to make your offer appealing to the buyer? What are some things that you can do in order to stand out from the rest of the crowd? Now, one of the things that people have been doing for years is writing a personal letter to the sellers to tell them how much they love the home and what they're looking forward to and how they're going to live their life there with their two kids, Billy and Sally, and their dog, Petunia, all that kind of great stuff. That's great, and it can work, and I'll talk a little bit about that more seriously, because there is a certain level of effectiveness to it, but it's something that a lot of people do. So the sellers of the house that you want to buy may be inundated with 5 or 10 letters from 5 or 10 sellers, if they have that many offers. But the reason that it does tend to work with modern homes even more than traditional homes is because usually the people selling modern homes really love those homes. Just the way you're passionate about them, the way I'm passionate about them, they're passionate about them because they've been living there for years and years, sometimes, maybe not always, but a lot of times, especially if a seller has been there for a long time, that house is very important to them. It's important to their family and their life up to that point. And so if you can appeal to that, that's definitely going to work in your favor. Now, I can't tell you exactly what to say to try to appeal to somebody, but try to put yourself in their shoes and tell them anything that's true about why you love the house and why you're excited about it. All right, the next thing you might want to try is obviously offering more than list price. If you think the price is a fair price for the house, which is something we're going to talk about in terms of the market comps for that area and what the house is, then feel free to go over list price, because I guarantee you somebody else who is bidding on that house is going to do exactly the same thing. So again, you need to be comfortable with the price you're paying for the house. But if you're talking about the difference between $1,000 or $2,000 or even $5,000, depending on the price point, or even more than that if it's a much more expensive house, you have to ask yourself, am I going to risk losing this house over that amount of money? Especially if you're a cash buyer and you're not too worried about, the value of it within a few $1,000s. Definitely go over if you're comfortable with it, if you think the house is worth it, and if you think you'd be really devastated if you missed out on the house. All right, the next thing is to put down a decent amount of earnest money. Now, in some areas like the North Shore, it's kind of expected that a buyer is going to put down at least 5% earnest money. In other parts of the suburbs, it's not really that much of a hard and fast rule. I always recommend a minimum of 2%. But if you're putting down 20% on a house anyway, there's no reason to not put down 5 or 10% in earnest money. Now, earnest money is a little bit complicated in Illinois. If the transaction falls apart, the buyer and the seller have to agree on how that earnest money is dispersed. But the seller is going to, in that case, want to move on with another offer. So you should be fine in terms of them not trying to hold your earnest money hostage or anything like that. The other thing is we can also split your earnest money in two parts. So we can offer a certain amount initially if your offer is accepted by the seller, and then an additional amount later on after you've done your home inspection and radon test and all that kind of stuff. Again, I'll talk more about that stuff in a minute, but it's very common for us to split earnest money in two parts. Sometimes you do it half and half, sometimes you do a much smaller amount up front with the balance after the attorney review and inspection period, which we call AI. And so that's one strategy that you can do. And the greater amount of earnest money shows the seller that you've got a little bit more skin in the game and you're fine leaving that money in escrow until you close because you're serious about purchasing the house. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is something that some of you may be familiar with, but others may not. It's called an escalation clause. What that is, it's a little addendum to the contract where you say that you will basically pay X number of dollars over the next highest bona fide offer up to a certain amount. So let's say, just to make up some numbers, let's say you're offering $500,000 on a house and you're worried that somebody's going to come in at $505,000. You can say, I will pay $2,500 over the next highest bona fide offer up to $525,000. And again, I'm just making up those numbers. It can be in $1,000 increments, it can be in $5,000 increments, whatever it is, and you obviously need to set a maximum. Now, in a multiple offer situation, it is not the case that you will normally see any other offers, even if you are the one who gets the house ultimately. There is no way to force the seller or the seller's agent to show us any other offers that they claim to have. And that is just an unfortunate reality that you have to accept. And sometimes it really eats at buyers thinking that they've gotten taken, in a sense, that the selling agent and the sellers kind of were in cahoots to effectively cheat the buyer out of some additional money by telling them there were multiple offers when really there weren't. There's really no way to know. However, with an escalation clause, there's a bit better of a chance that you will see at least one other offer, because it's pretty customary for the buyer's agent to ask the listing agent to see a copy of the offer that caused your escalation clause to kick in. So I've been on both sides of that, and when I have shared those offers with the buyer's agent, and when I've been on the other side, I've been shown those offers from the listing agent. It's something we would want to make clear up front, that we're submitting this offer with an escalation clause, but we expect to see any offer that causes the escalation clause to kick in. And now you can ask me to not make that stipulation if you're okay with it. but then you have to accept the fact that you may not see those other offers. I do recommend asking for it though. Okay, another thing that you can do to make your offer better versus the competition is you can offer to pay some of the seller's closing costs. Both the buyer and the seller in a transaction are going to have some form of closing costs. So maybe you could say, okay, we'll pay the seller's closing costs up to $5,000 or $7,500 or whatever it is. Again, a lot of that's going to depend on the price point of your transaction. But that's another thing that you can do to make your offer stand out. And similarly, you could offer to receive less of or no tax proration. So because we pay our taxes in arrears in Illinois, meaning, for instance, in 2021, you're going to pay your property taxes for 2020. So normally a buyer gets a tax credit. Usually that's negotiated to 105% of the most recent tax year's value. So if the person's taxes were $12,000, you're going to get 105% of that amount. And the reason for that is you are going to have to pay the taxes in 2021 for 2020 when you did not own the house. However, to make it more appealing, you could offer to, in your offer, you could say that you're willing to take less of a tax proration. So maybe you can make that 100% instead of 105, or maybe you can make it 75% or 50%. If you're feeling really crazy, maybe you could say that, you're gonna take a 0% tax proration, which means the seller doesn't have to give you that credit at closing. Totally up to you, but again, it's something that you can do to make your offer better. Okay, now this is a big one and this comes up a lot. One of the biggest things that you can do to make your offer better is to offer to purchase the property as is. Now that does not mean that you're not allowed to do a home inspection. In fact, you can do whatever inspections you want within the attorney review and inspection period. Again, that's normally 5 business days. However, you can offer to purchase the house as is, which means that you do your home inspection, and as long as you're fine with anything that came up in the home inspection, you go ahead and move forward with the transaction, and hopefully everything is hunky-dory and you end up with the house of your dreams and everyone's happy. If some stuff comes up on the home inspection and or the radon test, etc., that it really makes you nervous, you can either terminate the transaction and get your earnest money back, or you can ask them if they're willing to do anything about it. However, I generally advise you that if you're putting in an offer as is, that you do treat it like an as is offer. So you either find out what you find out and move forward if you're okay with whatever you found out, or you find out what you find out and you terminate the transaction. Again, a lot of this is going to come down to whether or not you really are desperate to have this house, and only you can make that decision. But offering to purchase property as is takes a lot of pressure off the seller because they know they're not going to be nickel and dimed about a bunch of things that come up in the home inspection. Okay, and the last thing, and this is pretty basic, but it's still another thing that you can offer, just prepare to be flexible with the closing date. Now now this is kind of a simple one, but another thing that you can do to make your offer better is to prepare to be a little bit flexible with the closing date. Now maybe you have some kind of scenario that prevents you from closing before a certain time or after a certain time, and it is what it is in that scenario. But if you can be flexible on the closing date, I can have a conversation with the listing agent about what kind of closing time frame the sellers would like. Maybe they need a little bit of extra time to get stuff out of the house, or maybe they'd like to close sooner rather than later for some reason. Let's find out what that is, and if you have some flexibility, being flexible with that can also make your offer much more appealing, because there are some sellers who are going to need a lot of time to get stuff out of a house, and there are some sellers who need to close really quickly for one reason or another. So if you can be flexible about that and meet those dates, that could be the difference between you getting the house or not getting the house. Okay, so just to recap a few things about dealing with a multiple offer situation when you're a buyer. So like I mentioned before, typically in a multiple offer situation, you're never really going to know how many other offers there were or what the terms of those offers were, or even if those offers truly did exist. Now, I would hope that no realtor would falsify that kind of information, but I can't guarantee it. There are a lot of realtors I've never worked with before, I don't have any kind of relationship with, so I have no trust level with them one way or another. And it's an unfortunate reality of the situation that you're just going to have to accept. But again, if you do an escalation clause as part of your offer, it's a little bit more likely, at least, that if another offer kicks in your escalation clause, you will be able to see that and the terms of that offer. So that's something to think about too. And again, just make sure you're able to act quickly in general, to be able to go see properties or have me go see them and do a FaceTime tour or a video tour, and to have all your paperwork ready in terms of your proof of funds and or your pre-qualification. You want to make sure you're really ready to go and you can act quickly when the time arises. And then the last thing, going back to the subject of appraisals, something that's coming up a lot now is a house may get multiple offers from more than one buyer who's getting a mortgage, in which case the seller does have to worry about the appraisal, especially if those buyers are offering over list price for the property and they've already priced it according to what the market is. So there's this whole concept of the appraisal gap, that potentially once the appraisal is done, it could come in at a value that's lower than the contract price. Now, if you think about it in common sense terms, it really doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you ask me, if an appraiser goes to a property and they know there are multiple offers and 5 people all put in offers around the same price, then that kind of says to me that the market has actually set the price of that property and the appraisal should be fine at that value. But unfortunately, appraisers and the lenders they work for, they're all incredibly heavily regulated, just like realtors are. And so they have their own crazy system of doing things that seems to not make sense, but it is what it is. So if there is an appraisal gap, a gap between the value that the appraiser comes up with for the house and the value, the amount that you've offered for the house, you are probably going to be asked by the sellers to agree that if that happens, that you will pay the difference, and to get it in writing from your lender as well, that they will continue to lend on the property so long as you pay that difference. So this puts some buyers in a really difficult or impossible situation, because if you don't have the extra money to be able to put up the cash for, let's say, a $5,000 difference, or maybe even a $25,000 difference, depending on the price point and where your offers end up, it's something you may not be able to agree with. And you may not be comfortable agreeing with it, but you may just not be able to agree with it in general. Most lenders are getting this question a lot right now, and so I think a lot of them are agreeing to it as long as the buyer agrees to it, and they may have you sign some additional paperwork to that effect as well. But it's something that you do need to be prepared for, especially if you're getting a mortgage. All right, so that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. If you have additional questions, please let me know. You can leave comments below, or you can contact me by email or give me a call or send me a text message, and I'll answer your questions as best as I can. And let's hope that we are able to find you the house of your dreams sooner rather than later.